Welcome back to our channel. Tonight, we're bringing you a story that will grip your heart from the very first word, a tale of a woman society deemed worthless, a duke frozen in grief, and the collision that changed everything. This is the story of Clara Whitmore, the invisible woman who dared to be seen, and Adrian Blackthorne, the man who had forgotten how to feel. If you love stories of courage, transformation, and love forged in fire, stay with us until the very end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from tonight. Now, let's begin. The chandeliers of Ashford Hall blazed like 1,000 captured stars, their crystal drops refracting light across the polished marble floors, where London's elite waltzed in a carefully choreographed display of wealth and breeding. The music swelled, a Strauss waltz performed by an orchestra hidden behind potted palms, and the air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and the faint metallic tang of ambition. Clara Whitmore stood in the shadows near the east wall, her fingers tracing the stem of an empty champagne flute she'd been holding for the past hour. Not because she'd drunk from it, she hadn't, but because holding something gave her hands purpose, made her look less like what she was, a woman with no place in this glittering world. At 24, Clara had perfected the art of invisibility. She knew exactly where to stand, never in the center, never completely hidden, but in that nebulous space where the eye slides past without registering. She knew how to angle her body so she appeared engaged in the spectacle without actually participating. She knew which expressions to wear, pleasant but not memorable, interested but not eager, present but not intrusive. She was a ghost in pale blue silk, a dress she'd altered 3 times to keep current with fashion, each modification carefully executed in her rented room by candlelight. The fabric was good, her mother's, from before the money ran out, but the style was just outdated enough that anyone with a trained eye could tell she didn't belong. Not that anyone looked long enough to notice. "More champagne, miss." A footman appeared at her elbow, his tone perfunctory. "No, thank you." Clara smiled, and the footman moved on without a second glance. This was her life now. 3 years since her father's death, 2 since the creditors had taken the house, 1 since she'd stopped pretending that her distant cousin's charity in bringing her to London was anything other than unpaid labor. Lady Margaret Thornbury needed a companion who could read to her, organize her correspondence, and disappear at social events while Margaret hunted for a wealthy 4th husband. Clara had learned to disappear very well. She watched the dancers sweep past, Miss Harriet Pembroke in emerald silk that cost more than Clara would see in a year, Lord Somerset's daughter dripping in diamonds that caught the light like frozen fire, the Duchess of Waverley holding court near the refreshment table, her laugh carrying across the ballroom like a bell. These people existed in a different world than Clara. They were solid, real, weighted with consequence. She was smoke. "You there?" The voice cut through Clara's carefully maintained invisibility, like a knife through silk. "Girl." Clara turned slowly, her practiced smile already in place, to find herself facing a woman who seemed carved from winter itself. Evelyn Blackthorne, the Dowager Duchess of Thornfield, stood with her cane planted firmly on the marble floor, her silver hair swept into an elaborate coiffure that added inches to her already imposing height. She wore black. She always wore black, had for 3 years now. But the cut and quality of the fabric made every other woman in the room look like they were playing dress-up. The Duchess's eyes, still sharp at 70, swept over Clara with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock at market. "Fetch me a chair," the Duchess commanded. "A proper one, not those spindly gilt things. My hip is acting up, and I refuse to stand through another tedious hour of watching idiots pretend they know how to dance." The words hit Clara like cold water. The Duchess thought she was a servant. For a moment, Clara stood frozen. The old Clara, the one who still remembered what it felt like to have a name, a home, a place in the world, wanted to correct this imperious woman, to explain with icy politeness that she was Lady Margaret's companion, not household staff. But the new Clara, the invisible one, knew better. Correcting the Duchess would only draw attention, create a scene, mark her as someone who didn't know her place. The social calculus was simple: better to be mistaken for a servant than to be noticed for being presumptuous. Clara opened her mouth to murmur some excuse, to fade back into the shadows where she belonged. And then something inside her, something that had been compressed and silenced for 3 long years, simply refused. "Forgive me, Your Grace," Clara said, her voice clear and steady. "But I am not a servant. I am a guest. Admittedly, not a very important one, but a guest nonetheless. Perhaps you might ask one of the actual footmen? They're the ones in livery who get paid to fetch chairs." The words hung in the air like the moment after lightning strikes, before the thunder arrives. The Duchess's eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. Around them, conversation stuttered and died as people turned to stare. Clara felt the weight of those stares like physical pressure against her skin. She'd just committed social suicide, and she knew it. But Clara Whitmore had spent 3 years being treated like furniture, and she discovered in that moment that she was done. Completely, utterly done. If she was going to be ruined, at least she'd be ruined while standing up straight. The Duchess stared at her for a long moment, and Clara stared back, refusing to drop her gaze or apologize or do any of the things a sensible woman in her position should do. Then, impossibly, the Duchess smiled. It was a small smile, barely a quirk at the corner of her mouth, but it transformed her face from forbidding to something almost approving. "Well," the Duchess said, her voice carrying that particular tone of amusement that only the very wealthy and very powerful can truly achieve. "How refreshing. What is your name, girl?" "Clara Whitmore, Your Grace." "Whitmore." The Duchess's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Edmund Whitmore's daughter?" "Yes, Your Grace." "I knew your father. He had excellent taste in horses and terrible judgment in investments." The Duchess tapped her cane once against the floor. "You have his spine, I see. He once told the Duke of Marlborough that his new hunter was suitable only for the glue factory at a dinner party. Cost him an invitation to Blenheim Palace, but the horse did throw Marlborough the following week." Clara felt something loosen in her chest. A recognition, a connection to the father she'd lost, mediated through this terrifying woman. "He never mentioned that story," Clara said. "I imagine there were many things he didn't mention before his untimely death. Money troubles have a way of narrowing one's focus." The Duchess's assessment wasn't cruel, just factual. "So you're playing companion to some wealthy fool, I assume? Trading dignity for dinner?" The accuracy of the statement was like a slap, but Clara refused to flinch. "Playing companion? Yes," Clara said. "Trading dignity? I'm still deciding." The Duchess's smile widened fractionally. "Good answer." Behind the Duchess, the crowd at the ballroom entrance shifted and whispered, and Clara felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. The Duchess noticed her distraction and turned to look, and Clara saw something flicker across that formidable face. Love, worry, and bone-deep sadness all compressed into a single expression. Adrian Blackthorne, the Duke of Thornfield, entered the ballroom like winter personified. He was 32, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of a frozen lake. He wore formal evening dress with the kind of effortless perfection that only comes from having servants who know their jobs and unlimited funds to ensure those jobs are done right. But it was his face that drew the eye, all sharp angles and controlled emptiness, like a portrait painted in shades of ice. The whispers followed him like shadows. 3 years now since the accident. Still won't speak about it. They say he locked himself in Thornfield House for 6 months. The Marble Duke, they call him. Hasn't smiled since they found the body. Clara watched him navigate the crowd with mechanical precision, acknowledging greetings with minimal nods, his expression never changing, his movements economical and devoid of warmth. People parted before him not out of respect, but because approaching Adrian Blackthorne was like approaching a wall of ice, technically possible, but unpleasant and ultimately pointless. The Duchess's hand tightened on her cane. "My son," she said quietly, and the weight of grief in those 2 words could have crushed diamonds. Adrian reached his mother's side, bent to kiss her cheek with dutiful precision, and straightened without his expression changing at all. Up close, Clara could see the fine lines around his eyes, the shadows beneath them that spoke of poor sleep and relentless self-control. "Mother," he said, his voice deep and completely neutral. "Are you well?" "As well as can be expected at my age." The Duchess gestured toward Clara with her cane. "This is Miss Clara Whitmore. Edmund Whitmore's daughter. Adrian's gaze swung to Clara, and she felt the impact of his attention like a physical thing, cold, assessing, utterly indifferent. He looked at her the way one might look at a piece of furniture, registering its existence, categorizing it, and immediately dismissing it as irrelevant. "Miss Whitmore," he said, with a brief nod that served as both greeting and dismissal. Clara felt something hot and sharp rise in her chest. She'd spent 3 years being invisible, being dismissed, being treated like she didn't matter. But there was something about the Duke's complete and utter indifference that felt different from the casual dismissal of society. This wasn't just seeing past her. It was looking directly at her and deciding she was worth exactly nothing. Before Clara could respond, the orchestra struck up a new waltz, and Lady Pemberton, the hostess of tonight's ball, descended upon them with the determination of a woman who had been planning this moment for weeks. "Your Grace," she addressed Adrian with a smile that revealed too many teeth. "How wonderful to see you. I was just saying to Lord Pemberton that no ball is complete without Thornfield in attendance. And speaking of completion, I believe this is your dance?" It was not a question. Lady Pemberton had clearly orchestrated this moment with the precision of a military campaign, probably in the hopes that getting the reclusive Duke of Thornfield onto the dance floor might restore some of his lost humanity, and more importantly, make her ball the talk of the season. Adrian's expression didn't change, but Clara saw his jaw tighten fractionally. "I'm afraid I'm not dancing this evening," he said. "Nonsense!" Lady Pemberton's laugh was like glass breaking. "You can't disappoint me, Your Grace. Everyone is expecting it, and you need a partner, of course." Her eyes swept the crowd, looking for the most advantageous match, before landing, inexplicably, on Clara. In that moment, Clara understood exactly what was happening. Lady Pemberton had noticed the Duke speaking with his mother and the unknown woman in the outdated dress. She'd made a quick social calculation. Forcing the Duke to dance with someone so obviously beneath him would emphasize his status while simultaneously appearing magnanimous. Clara would be so grateful for the attention that she'd spend the next year telling everyone about Lady Pemberton's gracious hospitality. It was a neat bit of social maneuvering, and it made Clara's skin crawl. "The Duke can dance with Miss Whitmore," Lady Pemberton announced, gesturing at Clara like she was bestowing a great favor. "You are dancing this evening, aren't you, dear?" The patronizing endearment, the assumption that Clara would be thrilled, the casual wielding of social power, it all crystallized into a single moment of choice. Clara could refuse, plead a headache, retreat into invisibility, or she could accept, endure the Duke's cold indifference, and give Lady Pemberton exactly what she wanted, a piece of social theater to be dissected and discussed. She looked at Adrian Blackthorne, the marble Duke, standing there with his frozen expression and his dead eyes, and made a third choice. "I would be honored to dance with His Grace," Clara said, her voice clear and carrying. "Provided, of course, that His Grace actually wishes to dance with me, rather than being coerced into it by our hostess's well-meaning but rather transparent social maneuvering." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Pemberton's face went through several rapid color changes. The Duchess made a small sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. And Adrian Blackthorne looked at Clara, really looked at her, for the first time. His eyes weren't dead, she realized. They were locked, frozen, held under such rigid control that nothing could escape. But underneath that ice, something moved. "Miss Whitmore," he said slowly, his voice still controlled but with a new quality to it. Not warmth, but attention. "Appears to be the only honest person in this ballroom." He extended his hand. "Shall we?" Clara placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his palm through their gloves, and let him lead her onto the dance floor. The orchestra played. The crowd watched. And Clara Whitmore danced with the marble Duke while society held its collective breath. He was an excellent dancer, technically perfect. His movements precise and controlled, his frame providing exactly the right amount of support and direction. But dancing with him was like dancing with a beautifully crafted automaton. There was no joy in it, no connection, no life. "You've caused quite a stir," he said as they swept past Lady Pemberton's scowling face. His voice was neutral, conversational, utterly empty of genuine interest. "I seem to have a talent for it this evening," Clara replied. "Usually I excel at the opposite, going entirely unnoticed. Is that a skill you've cultivated?" "A necessity I've adapted to." They turned, his hand firm at her waist, everything perfectly proper and absolutely cold. "My mother seemed charmed by you," Adrian said. "Your mother mistook me for a servant, and I was impertinent. I'm not sure charmed is the appropriate word. You challenged her. She enjoys being challenged. It's rare for her." "Because most people are afraid of her?" "Because most people are boring." The bluntness of the statement surprised her. Clara studied his face as they moved through the waltz, looking for some sign of genuine engagement, but his expression remained perfectly neutral. "And am I boring, Your Grace?" she asked. "I haven't decided yet. You're at least novel." The dismissiveness in his tone, the implication that she was a curiosity, a brief distraction from the tedium of social obligation, made something inside Clara snap. She'd spent 3 years swallowing her pride, accepting dismissal, making herself small and quiet and forgettable. She'd danced invisibly through dozens of balls, accepted countless condescending remarks, smiled politely while people treated her like furniture. But standing here in the arms of this frozen, empty man who looked at her like she was a mildly interesting insect, Clara discovered she'd reached her limit. "How generous of you," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut, "to find me novel. I'm sure it's a pleasant change from the usual parade of women who actually matter. Tell me, Your Grace, is it exhausting to be so thoroughly indifferent to everything around you? Or have you practiced long enough that it comes naturally?" Adrian's steps didn't falter, but she felt his hand tighten fractionally at her waist. Around them, the couples close enough to overhear were openly staring now. "I beg your pardon?" His voice was still controlled, but there was something new in it, a dangerous edge. "You're not begging anything," Clara said, meeting his eyes directly. "You're not capable of begging. You're barely capable of feeling. You stand there like a marble statue, going through the motions of being human while actually being nothing more than an empty shell in expensive clothes. You overstep, Miss Whitmore." "I speak plainly, Your Grace. There's a difference. Though I understand plain speech might be novel for you, surrounded as you are by people who tell you what you want to hear." "And what exactly do you think I want to hear?" Clara saw it then, a crack in the ice, a flash of real emotion. Anger. Finally, something real. "Nothing," she said quietly. "I think you want to hear nothing. You want to feel nothing, think nothing, be nothing. You've built yourself a fortress of ice and locked yourself inside it, and now you're so comfortable in your frozen prison that you can't remember what it felt like to be warm." The music swelled around them. The other dancers maintained a careful distance, sensing danger. Adrian stared down at her, and for a moment Clara thought she'd gone too far, that he would simply stop dancing and walk away, leaving her standing alone on the dance floor. Instead, he leaned down slightly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You know nothing about me, Miss Whitmore. You know nothing about what I've lost or why I am the way I am. You're a poor girl playing dress-up at a world that will never accept you, surviving on the charity of people who could discard you at a moment's notice. You have no right to judge me." The words were designed to wound, and they did. But Clara had been wounded before, had survived worse than a duke's cutting remarks. "You're right," she said, matching his quiet intensity. "I know nothing about your loss, but I know what I see standing in front of me. And what I see is a man so afraid of feeling pain again that he's chosen to feel nothing at all. You call it strength. I call it cowardice." The music ended. Adrian released her immediately, stepped back, and bowed with mechanical precision. His face was a perfect mask once more, but Clara could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the rigid set of his shoulders. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice like ice cracking. "The pleasure was all mine, Your Grace," Clara replied with a curtsy that was technically perfect and absolutely mocking. He turned and walked away, the crowd parting before him, and Clara stood alone in the center of the dance floor, her heart pounding, her hands shaking, and her social reputation in smoking ruins. The Duchess appeared at her elbow, leaning on her cane, her eyes bright with something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Well," the Dowager Duchess said quietly, "that was magnificently stupid." Clara turned to face her, expecting condemnation, dismissal, the final severing of any tenuous connection she'd made. Instead, the Duchess smiled. A real smile this time. Not the small, polite curve of earlier, but something genuine and almost fierce. "I like you, Miss Whitmore. the Duchess said. "You're either remarkably brave or completely insane, and at my age, I've learned those two things are often indistinguishable. Come see me tomorrow at Thornfield House, 3 o'clock. Don't be late." Before Clara could respond, the Duchess turned and made her way through the crowd with surprising speed, leaving Clara standing alone while society's most vicious gossips began circling like sharks who'd just scented blood. Lady Margaret materialized beside her, white-faced with fury. "You stupid, stupid girl," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? You've insulted the Duke of Thornfield. In public, at Lady Pemberton's ball. You've ruined everything." Clara looked at her cousin, her benefactress, her jailer, her meal ticket, and felt the last threads of obligation snap. "Yes," she said, "I suppose I have." She walked out of Ashford Hall with her head held high, her cheap dress rustling around her ankles, and for the first time in 3 years, Clara Whitmore felt like herself again. She'd been invisible for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. It was terrifying, it was exhilarating, and as she climbed into the hired carriage that would take her back to Lady Margaret's townhouse, probably for the last time, Clara smiled into the darkness and wondered what the Dowager Duchess of Thornfield wanted with a ruined, penniless, impossibly foolish woman who'd just committed social suicide in front of half of London. She would find out tomorrow, if Lady Margaret didn't throw her out first. The carriage rolled through the London streets, and Clara Whitmore, the invisible woman who'd finally dared to speak, watched the city lights blur past and felt the future rushing toward her like a wave. She'd spent 3 years surviving. Tomorrow, she might start living again. Or she might be completely destroyed. Either way, she'd go down fighting, and that, Clara decided, was something. Lady Margaret didn't wait until morning. Clara had barely removed her gloves when her cousin appeared in the doorway of her small room, face twisted with rage that made her look 10 years older than her 43 years. "Pack your things," Margaret said, her voice shaking. "You have until dawn." Clara set her gloves carefully on the narrow dresser. Her hands were steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I assumed as much." "Assumed?" Margaret's laugh was shrill. "You insulted a duke. You humiliated me in front of everyone who matters. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" "I thought there would be exactly these consequences." "Then you're even more foolish than I imagined." Margaret stepped into the room, her silk dress rustling with agitation. "I took you in when you had nothing, fed you, clothed you, brought you to London. And this is how you repay me? By destroying any chance I had of—" She stopped abruptly. "Of what?" Clara asked quietly. "Of catching another wealthy husband? I hate to inform you, Margaret, but my presence or absence has no bearing on that particular endeavor." The slap came fast, sharp, and entirely expected. Clara's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning, but she didn't raise her hand to touch it. "Get out of my house," Margaret hissed. "I want you gone before first light, and don't expect references. Don't expect recommendations. You'll be lucky to find work as a scullery maid after tonight." She swept from the room, and Clara listened to her footsteps fade down the hallway before finally allowing herself to sink onto the bed. She had £40 saved, carefully hoarded coins from the pin money Margaret grudgingly provided, from mended gloves and translated letters, and a dozen other small tasks performed for people who paid invisibility well. £40 wasn't nothing, but in London it would last perhaps 2 months if she was extraordinarily careful. After that, nothing. Clara looked around the small room that had been her prison and refuge for 2 years. It contained almost nothing of her. A few books, some mending, the altered dress she'd worn tonight now carefully hung to prevent wrinkles. She could pack everything she owned in less than an hour. She'd been preparing to leave for months without realizing it, keeping her possessions minimal, her attachments fewer still. Now she just had to figure out where to go. She didn't sleep. Instead, Clara sat by the window and watched London's sky lighten from black to gray to pale pink, and thought about the Dowager Duchess's invitation. 3 o'clock at Thornfield House. It was probably a cruel joke. Or perhaps the Duchess wanted to personally witness Clara's social destruction, to deliver some cutting remark about knowing one's place. Either way, Clara had nothing to lose by going. She packed her belongings as dawn broke, carried her single trunk down the servants' stairs to avoid encountering Margaret, and hired a cab to take her to a boarding house in a respectable but unremarkable part of the city. The landlady, a sharp-eyed widow named Mrs. Davies, took Clara's money for a week's lodging and asked no questions beyond whether she expected visitors. "No visitors," Clara said. "Good. I run a decent house." Clara's room was smaller than the one she'd left, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked a sooty courtyard. But it was hers, paid for with her own money, and she answered to no one. She had 5 hours before the Duchess's appointment. Clara spent 3 of them walking through London, learning the streets around her new lodgings, finding the market where food was cheapest, the lending library where she might trade her few books for others, the employment agency where desperate women lined up hoping for positions as governesses or companions. She would be one of them soon enough. At 2:30, Clara changed into her second-best dress, a dove gray that had belonged to her mother, carefully preserved, and took a hired cab to Mayfair. Thornfield House rose from the elegant street like a fortress built of honey-colored stone and iron will. It was massive, beautiful, and utterly intimidating, with tall windows that reflected the afternoon sun like blank eyes and a black front door that looked thick enough to withstand a siege. Clara paid the driver, squared her shoulders, and climbed the steps. The butler who answered her knock was elderly, dignified, and clearly surprised to find her on the doorstep. "Miss Clara Whitmore," she said, her voice steady. "The Dowager Duchess is expecting me." The butler's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Indeed. Please come in, miss." The entrance hall was everything Clara expected. Soaring ceilings, marble floors, a chandelier that probably cost more than her father's entire estate, and an atmosphere of refined wealth so thick she could almost taste it. But there was something else, too. Something she hadn't anticipated. Emptiness. Despite its grandeur, Thornfield House felt hollow, like a beautiful shell with nothing living inside. "This way, miss." The butler led her through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced blackthorns, past closed doors that suggested unused rooms, and finally to a sitting room that overlooked a garden gone wild. The Dowager Duchess sat in a wingback chair by the window, dressed in black as always, her silver hair precisely arranged, her cane resting against her knee. She was reading a letter but set it aside when Clara entered. "Miss Whitmore. Punctual. I appreciate that." "Your Grace," Clara curtsied, trying not to look as nervous as she felt. "Sit down. You're making me tired standing there like a deer expecting to be shot." Clara sat, perching on the edge of a chair that probably cost more than her boarding house room. The Duchess studied her in silence for a long moment, her sharp eyes missing nothing, not the carefully mended gray dress, not the shadows under Clara's eyes from a sleepless night, not the rigid set of her shoulders that betrayed her tension. "You left Lady Margaret's house," the Duchess said finally. It wasn't a question. "I was asked to leave." "I imagine you were. The woman's a fool, but even fools have their limits." The Duchess tapped her fingers on the arm of her chair. "Where are you staying? A boarding house in Bloomsbury? Respectable? Adequate. And your plans?" Clara met the Duchess's eyes directly. "I'm not sure why you've asked me here, Your Grace, but if it's to witness my downfall or deliver a lecture about knowing my place, I'd appreciate if we could expedite the process. I have employment agencies to visit this afternoon." The Duchess's laugh was sharp and genuine. "I knew I liked you. No, Miss Whitmore, I haven't summoned you to gloat. I've summoned you to make you an offer." Clara's heart stuttered. "An offer?" "My son is dying." The words fell into the room like stones into still water. "Not physically," the Duchess continued, her voice hardening. "Physically, he's disgustingly healthy, but everything that made Adrian human died 3 years ago with his brother, and I've watched him turn into a walking corpse ever since. He doesn't feel, doesn't hope, doesn't live. He exists, performs his duties as Duke with mechanical precision, and feels absolutely nothing while doing it." Clara remembered the frozen lake of Adrian's eyes, the controlled emptiness of his movements. "With respect, Your Grace, I'm not sure how this concerns me. Last night, for the first time in 3 years, I saw my son feel something." The Duchess leaned forward slightly. "You made him angry. You cracked that infernal ice he's wrapped himself in. And anger, Miss Whitmore, is at least an emotion. It's at least proof that something still lives underneath all that marble." "So you want me to—" What? Insult him regularly? I'm not sure that's a sound strategy for his recovery. I want you to live here, in this house, as my companion. Clara stared at her. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. You'll have a room, a salary, and the task of keeping me company, reading to me, organizing my correspondence, accompanying me on calls, all the usual companion duties, and coincidentally placing me in constant proximity to your son. Coincidentally, the Duchess's smile was sharp as a blade. He'll hate it. He made his opinion of me quite clear last night. I'm aware. Which is why this might actually work. You're not trying to please him or seduce him or reform him. You don't need his approval or his affection. You challenged him because it was true, not because you had some ulterior motive. Clara shook her head slowly. This is madness. You're asking me to move into a hostile household to antagonize a man who has the power to make my life infinitely worse than it already is. Yes. Why would I agree to that? The Duchess sat back in her chair. Because you need money and employment, and I'm offering both. Because you're intelligent enough to know that a position in a ducal household, even a temporary one, will look better on your employment history than a boarding house in Bloomsbury. And because, whether you admit it or not, you're curious about whether that frozen man can be thawed. Clara wanted to deny it, but the Duchess was right. There had been something in that moment on the dance floor, that flash of real anger in Adrian's eyes, that had felt like discovering fire in the middle of winter. What if I fail? Clara asked quietly. What if I simply make things worse? Then you'll have failed spectacularly while living in comfort and earning a generous salary. The Duchess named a figure that made Clara's breath catch. It was more than she'd made in 2 years with Margaret. At worst, you'll spend a few months in beautiful surroundings being paid well to annoy a duke. At best, you might help save my son's life. And if he forbids it? This is my house. I can hire whomever I please. Clara looked around the elegant sitting room, at the wild garden beyond, at the Duchess's face where hope and desperation warred beneath iron control. This was insane. Moving into Adrian Blackthorne's house, deliberately provoking a powerful man who'd made clear his disdain for her, gambling her future on the possibility that anger might somehow transform into healing. It was reckless, dangerous, and utterly mad. Clara thought about the boarding house room, the employment agencies, the long, slow slide into poverty that awaited her. She thought about invisibility, about 3 years of silence, about becoming nothing. And she thought about the Duke's eyes, frozen solid, and the dangerous spark that had ignited when she'd called him a coward. When would I start? Clara asked. The Duchess's smile was triumphant. Today. I'll send for your things from the boarding house. You can have the blue room, 3rd floor, east wing. It has excellent light. Before Clara could second-guess her decision, the Duchess rang for the butler. Jameson, please show Miss Whitmore to the blue room and inform Mrs. Hendricks we have a new member of the household. Miss Whitmore will be serving as my companion. Very good, Your Grace. If Jameson was surprised, he hid it masterfully. This way, miss. Clara followed him through more corridors, up a sweeping staircase, and into a room that took her breath away. It was 3 times the size of her boarding house lodgings, decorated in shades of cream and blue, with tall windows overlooking the wild garden and furniture that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. Mrs. Hendricks will send someone to help you unpack when your things arrive, Jameson said. Dinner is at 8. The Duchess dines in her private sitting room, but His Grace maintains the formal dining room. You'll dine with Her Grace unless otherwise instructed. And His Grace? Clara asked, because she needed to know. Does he know I'm here? His Grace is currently out. He typically returns around 6, which gave Clara approximately 2 hours before she faced Adrian Blackthorne again. She spent them unpacking her meager belongings. They looked absurd in the huge wardrobe, and trying not to think about what she'd just agreed to. A young maid appeared to help, chattering nervously about the household while Clara listened and learned. The house had 27 rooms, most unused. The staff was minimal for a ducal estate. The Duchess had reduced it after the accident, after Adrian had stopped entertaining. His Grace kept to his study or his rooms, rarely emerging except for unavoidable social obligations. The servants walked quietly, spoke in whispers, treated the house like a mausoleum. It's a sad place, miss, the maid confided, her voice dropping. Used to be full of life, they say. Before the accident. Before Master James. She stopped abruptly, eyes widening. Begging your pardon, miss, I shouldn't gossip. It's all right, Clara said gently. I understand. At precisely 6 o'clock, Clara heard the front door open and close with controlled precision. She was in her room, pretending to read, but she heard it clearly. Heard his footsteps cross the marble floor, heard the murmur of Jameson's voice, heard the sudden, sharp silence. Then footsteps on the stairs, quick and angry. A door slammed somewhere below. Clara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The battle had begun. Dinner was an exercise in tension. The Duchess presided over her private sitting room table with Clara seated across from her, and they ate excellent food while the Duchess explained household routines with the careful precision of a general deploying troops. Adrian typically breakfasts at 7 and leaves for his clubs or business meetings shortly after. He returns for dinner but rarely speaks beyond basic civility. He spends his evenings in his study, going through estate papers or correspondence. He does not welcome interruption. I'll avoid him as much as possible, Clara said. On the contrary, you'll be precisely where you need to be to make avoidance impossible. Tomorrow morning, you'll take your breakfast in the morning room at 7:30. You'll accompany me on my afternoon calls. You'll read to me in the main library between 4 and 5 each day. Adrian uses that library for his evening work, so he'll need to either share the space or change his routine. Clara set down her fork. You're deliberately orchestrating our encounters. I'm ensuring my companion has access to the household's public spaces. If my son happens to be present, that's simply coincidence. He's going to see right through this. Of course he will. But what can he do? Forbid his own mother's companion from using the library? That would require him to care enough to make a fuss, and caring is precisely what he's avoiding. It was diabolical, brilliant, and completely ruthless. Clara was beginning to understand where Adrian had learned his iron control. After dinner, the Duchess retired early, leaving Clara alone in her beautiful room with nothing to do but think about the morning. She didn't sleep well. At 7:30 the next morning, Clara made her way down to the morning room with her heart in her throat. It was a smaller, sunnier space than the formal dining room, with windows overlooking the front drive and a sideboard laden with covered dishes. Adrian Blackthorne sat at the table reading the Times, a cup of coffee at his elbow, his breakfast half eaten on the plate before him. He didn't look up when Clara entered. She served herself from the sideboard, toast, eggs, tea, and sat down at the opposite end of the table. Silence. Adrian turned a page of his newspaper. Clara buttered her toast and tried to appear unconcerned while her stomach churned. Finally, Adrian folded his paper with deliberate precision and set it aside, his eyes, cold as winter, fixed on her face. Miss Whitmore. Your Grace. Oh, I was informed last night that my mother has hired you as her companion. That's correct? How convenient, given that you were recently dismissed from your previous position. Clara set down her knife with deliberate care. I was not dismissed. I left. There's a difference. A subtle one, I'm sure. His voice was perfectly neutral, but Clara heard the contempt underneath. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, did you orchestrate our encounter at the ball specifically to gain my mother's attention? Is this entire performance carefully calculated to secure yourself a position in a wealthy household? The accusation hit like a physical blow, partly because it was so viciously unfair, and partly because Clara could see how it might look from his perspective. A desperate woman insulting a duke, conveniently catching his mother's interest, miraculously landing a lucrative position. Yes, Clara said, her voice cutting. I planned the entire thing. I arranged to be mistaken for a servant, calculated precisely what impertinent remark would intrigue your mother, and deliberately insulted you on the dance floor as part of an elaborate scheme to become a companion. It was a masterful plan, really. Very subtle. You mock me in my own house. I answer your absurd accusations with the ridicule they deserve. If you truly believe I'm that calculating, you give me far too much credit. I'm not a scheming adventuress, Your Grace. I'm a woman who needed employment and accepted an offer. If my presence in your house disturbs you, I suggest you take it up with your mother. Adrian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You know nothing about this household or its history. You're playing games in a situation you don't understand. Then enlighten me. Clara stood as well, refusing to let him loom over her. Tell me what I'm supposedly failing to understand. Explain why your mother is so desperate to crack your frozen shell that she'd hire a stranger to live in your house. Make me understand why a duke would lock himself away from the world instead of living in it. My reasons are none of your concern. Then neither is my employment. Your mother hired me. Your mother pays my salary. Your mother determines whether I stay or go. You, Your Grace, are simply a man who happens to live in the same house. The muscle in Adrian's jaw jumped. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually lose control, might shout or storm out or do something that proved he was still capable of real emotion. Instead, he picked up his newspaper, tucked it under his arm, and walked to the door with rigid precision. Stay out of my way, Miss Whitmore. I'll do my best, Your Grace, though in a house this size, encounters are inevitable. He left without responding, and Clara sank back into her chair with shaking hands. The Duchess had been right about one thing. Clara could still make him angry. Whether that anger would crack his ice or simply make him more determined to freeze her out remained to be seen. The days fell into a brutal pattern. Clara performed her duties as companion with meticulous care, reading to the Duchess, writing letters, accompanying her on the few social calls Evelyn still maintained. But the Duchess's strategy of engineered proximity meant Clara encountered Adrian constantly. In the library at 4 o'clock, where Adrian would find her reading aloud while his mother listened with closed eyes. He'd stand in the doorway, jaw tight, then turn and leave without a word. In the hallway outside his study, where Clara made a point of walking past precisely when he emerged for dinner. In the morning room at breakfast, where they maintained hostile silence while the tension grew thick enough to cut. The servants noticed. Clara heard their whispers, saw their concerned glances. The house, already heavy with grief, now crackled with a different energy, something electric and dangerous. Adrian never spoke to her beyond icy civility when circumstances absolutely required it, but Clara felt his attention like a weight, felt him watching her with those frozen eyes, calculating, assessing, maintaining his perfect control. Until the afternoon, she found the portrait. She'd been exploring the unused wings of the house. The Duchess had given her permission to go anywhere except Adrian's private rooms, and had wandered into what was clearly a family gallery. Generations of blackthorns stared down from ornate frames, all dark hair and aristocratic features and varying degrees of hauteur. At the end of the gallery hung a portrait that made Clara stop breathing. Two young men stood side by side, arms slung around each other's shoulders, laughing at something beyond the frame. One was Adrian, younger, perhaps 25, his face alight with joy and mischief that seemed impossible on the frozen man Clara knew. The other was clearly his brother, similar enough in features but lighter somehow, all golden charm where Adrian was dark intensity. James Blackthorne had died 3 years ago, but in this portrait he blazed with life. Clara stood transfixed, staring at this version of Adrian who could laugh, who could feel, who looked at his brother with such obvious love that it hurt to witness. "Get away from that!" The voice came from behind her, sharp and raw with a pain so visceral it stripped away every layer of control. Clara turned to find Adrian in the doorway, and for the first time since she'd met him, his face showed everything: grief, rage, anguish, emotions so powerful they transformed him from marble into bleeding flesh. "I'm sorry," Clara said quietly. "I didn't mean to intrude. This gallery is closed." His voice shook. "You have no right to be here. No right to look at him. No right—" He stopped abruptly, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing harsh. Clara should have left, should have apologized again and retreated, should have let him rebuild his walls in private. Instead, she looked back at the portrait. "He looks like he was full of light," she said softly. "Don't." The word was a warning. "The way you're looking at him in this portrait, the love is so clear. Whatever happened, whatever you lost, that love was real. Stop talking. He wouldn't want this." Clara turned back to face Adrian, and the devastation in his eyes nearly broke her. Whatever he was like, whoever he wouldn't want you to bury yourself alive because he's gone. You know nothing about what he'd want. Adrian's voice was ragged now, all pretense of control shattered. You didn't know him. You don't know what happened. You don't know. Then tell me. The silence stretched between them, brittle and sharp. It was my fault, Adrian said finally, the words ripped from somewhere deep and bleeding. He died because of me, because I wasn't there, because I was too busy with estate business to go riding with him that morning, because I let him go alone to check the north property line where the terrain was rough and the cliffs were unstable, because I should have known, should have been there, should have saved him. His voice broke on the last word. The horse came back without him. It took us 6 hours to find the body. 6 hours of searching while I knew he was gone. And when we found him at the base of that cliff, broken and cold, I realized that the last thing I'd said to him was, "Handle it yourself." Those were my final words to my brother. Handle it yourself. Clara felt tears burning in her eyes, but she didn't look away. So yes, Miss Whitmore, I've frozen myself. Because feeling this, he gestured sharply at his chest, is unbearable. Because the guilt and the grief and the knowledge that I failed the person I loved most in the world is so crushing that the only way to survive is to feel nothing at all. And I've been doing quite well at that until you arrived with your judgments and your challenges and your insistence on making me remember what it feels like to be human. I'm sorry, Clara whispered. I'm so sorry for your loss. I don't want your pity. Good. Because I'm not offering pity, I'm offering truth. Clara took a breath, knowing she was about to cross a line from which there was no return. Your brother's death was an accident, a tragedy, yes, but not your fault. You couldn't have prevented it by being there. You couldn't have seen the future or changed what happened. And choosing to stop living because he died doesn't honor his memory. It wastes yours. How dare you? How dare I tell you the truth? How dare I refuse to let you hide behind your guilt and your ice? How dare I suggest that maybe, just maybe, you owe it to your brother's memory to actually live the life he lost? Clara's voice rose, passionate and fierce. Yes, Your Grace. How dare I indeed? Adrian stared at her, breathing hard, his eyes blazing with emotions too complex to name. For a moment, Clara thought he might grab her, shake her, shout at her until his voice broke. Instead, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the empty gallery. But this time, his control didn't snap back into place. This time, the cracks showed. And Clara stood alone before the portrait of two laughing brothers, her heart pounding, knowing she'd just torn open wounds that had been carefully sealed for 3 years. The Duchess found her there an hour later, still staring at the portrait. He told you about James, the Dowager said quietly. Yes, that's more than he's told anyone in 3 years, including me. Clara turned to look at her. Did I make a terrible mistake? The Duchess studied her for a long moment, her sharp eyes seeing everything. You made a gamble, Miss Whitmore. Whether it was a mistake remains to be seen, but at least he's feeling something, even if it's pain. Pain seems like a poor substitute for healing. Pain is where healing begins. The frozen don't heal, child. They simply remain frozen until they shatter. That night, Clara lay awake in her beautiful room and wondered if she'd just helped crack Adrian's ice or simply driven the shards deeper into his heart. She'd know soon enough. The house felt different now, not lighter, but changed, like something long dormant had begun to shift. And Clara Whitmore, the invisible woman who'd been hired to thaw a duke, realized she'd just bet everything on a gamble that might destroy them both. For 3 days after the confrontation in the gallery, Adrian disappeared. Not physically. Clara still heard his footsteps in the halls, still saw evidence of his presence in the study's burning lamps and the breakfast dishes cleared by servants. But he avoided her with such meticulous precision that she might as well have been invisible again. The irony wasn't lost on her. The Duchess said nothing, but Clara caught her watching with those sharp eyes, calculating, measuring, waiting to see what would break first, Adrian's walls or Clara's resolve. On the 4th morning, Clara found a note slipped under her door. The Duke requests Miss Whitmore's presence in the library at 4 o'clock. A matter of household business requires discussion. The handwriting was precise, controlled, utterly impersonal. Clara held the note and felt dread settle in her stomach like a stone. He was going to dismiss her. Of course he was. She'd overstepped catastrophically, torn open his most painful wounds, and now he was going to exercise the power he'd always had. the power to remove her from his house and his life with a single word. Clara dressed carefully that afternoon, choosing the gray dress again because it made her feel armored, and made her way to the library at precisely 4 o'clock. Adrian stood by the window, his back to the door, his posture rigid. He didn't turn when she entered. "Close the door, please." Clara obeyed, her heart hammering. "Sit down." She sat in one of the leather chairs near the fireplace, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. Adrian finally turned to face her, and Clara was shocked by what she saw. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, a tightness around his mouth that spoke of sleepless nights and barely controlled emotion. The marble facade had cracks running through it now, visible and raw. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice carefully neutral. "About my brother, about my guilt, about the choices I've made since his death." "Your Grace, please don't interrupt." It wasn't harsh, just tired. "I need to say this, and if you interrupt, I may not be able to finish." Clara nodded, barely breathing. Adrian moved to the chair across from her, sat down with deliberate precision, and met her eyes for the first time in days. "You were right," he said quietly, "about almost everything. I have been hiding. I have been using grief as an excuse to stop living, and I have been—" His jaw tightened, "a coward." The admission hung in the air between them. For 3 years I've told myself that feeling nothing was strength, that control was the same as healing, that if I just maintained the ice long enough, eventually the pain would fade and I could go back to being the man I was before James died. He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "But that man is gone, isn't he? He died on that cliff with his brother. And I've been so busy trying to become him again that I never considered I might need to become someone different instead." Clara's throat tightened. "Adrian." "I'm not finished." He held up one hand. "You came into this house and you saw through me immediately. You called me a coward to my face, challenged me when no one else dared, and refused to let me hide behind my title or my grief. And I hated you for it. I hated you for making me feel again, for forcing me to remember what it's like to be angry and hurt and human." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense on hers. "But I've spent 3 days thinking about what you said in that gallery, about James, about honor and memory and waste, and I realized something." His voice dropped, became almost gentle. "You're the first person in 3 years who's treated me like I'm still alive. Everyone else tiptoes around me, speaks in hushed voices, treats me like I'm made of glass. But you treat me like a man capable of being better than he is." "Because you are," Clara whispered. "Perhaps." He sat back, and some of the intensity faded from his expression, replaced by something that might have been resignation. "Or perhaps I'm simply a broken man who's been clinging to his brokenness because it's familiar. Either way, you've made it impossible for me to continue as I have been, which brings me to why I asked you here." This was it. The dismissal. Clara braced herself. "I need your help." Clara blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I said I need your help." Adrian's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. "I don't know how to stop being frozen. I don't know how to feel without being consumed by grief. I don't know how to live again without betraying my brother's memory. But you seem to think it's possible, so I'm asking, help me figure out how." The request was so unexpected, so raw and honest, and completely unlike the controlled Duke she'd first met, that Clara could only stare at him. "You're asking me to help you heal?" "I'm asking you to keep doing what you've been doing, challenging me, pushing me, not letting me retreat into ice when things become difficult." He met her eyes directly. "I'm asking you to be honest with me, even when that honesty is brutal, especially when it's brutal. Because comfortable lies are what got me here, and I need uncomfortable truths to find my way out." Clara felt something shift in her chest, a dangerous warmth, a connection forming that had nothing to do with duty or employment and everything to do with the man sitting across from her, stripped of pretense, asking for help. "I'll try," she said softly. "But I can't promise I won't make mistakes. I'm not a physician or a counselor. I'm just a woman who speaks her mind too freely." "That's exactly what I need." Something that might have been a smile ghosted across Adrian's face. "Someone who speaks freely instead of carefully. Someone who treats me like a person instead of a porcelain duke. Before Clara could respond, the library door burst open and the Duchess swept in, her face pale, a letter clutched in her hand. Adrian, we have a problem. The warmth drained from the room instantly. Adrian stood, his body going rigid with tension. What's happened? Victor Hale has returned to London. The Duchess's voice was tight with controlled fury. And he's spreading stories about Miss Whitmore. Clara's blood went cold. Victor Hale. She hadn't heard that name in over a year, had hoped never to hear it again. Who is Victor Hale? Adrian asked, his eyes moving between his mother and Clara. A mistake, Clara said quietly. From before my father died. He was her suitor, the Duchess elaborated, her lip curling with distaste. Or so he claimed. In reality, he was a fortune hunter who courted her when he thought Edmund Whitmore had money to settle on his daughter. When he discovered the estate was mortgaged to the hilt, he withdrew his suit with remarkable speed. And now he's back? Adrian's voice had gone dangerously quiet. The Duchess handed him the letter. Lady Pemberton was kind enough to inform me. Apparently Hale has been telling anyone who will listen that Clara deliberately entrapped him, lied about her circumstances, and then threw herself at me when her schemes failed. He's claiming she's a scheming adventuress who manipulates wealthy families for her own gain. Adrian read the letter, his jaw tightening with each line. When he finished, he looked at Clara with an expression she couldn't read. Is any of this true? The question hurt, but Clara couldn't blame him for asking. Victor courted me for 3 months before my father died. I believed his affection was genuine. When the creditors came and he disappeared within a week, I learned otherwise. I have not spoken to him or contacted him since. I have no idea why he's spreading these lies now. I do. The Duchess's voice was grim. You're living in Thornfield House. You're associated with our family. Victor sees an opportunity to insert himself into our social circle by positioning himself as the man who exposed a supposed schemer. It gives him relevance, makes him interesting, potentially opens doors. He's using Clara as currency, Adrian said flatly. Precisely. Clara stood, her hands trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. I should leave. If my presence here is causing scandal, sit down. Adrian's voice cut through her panic like a blade. Your Grace, sit down. Clara sat, more from shock at his tone than obedience. Adrian turned to his mother. Where is Hale now? He's been invited to Lady Pemberton's evening salon tomorrow night. Most of society will be there. He's planning to make his accusations public. Then we'll be there as well. Adrian's voice was ice over steel. All 3 of us. And Mr. Hale will learn that spreading lies about members of this household has consequences. Adrian, that's not necessary, Clara began. It's absolutely necessary. He cut her off, his eyes blazing with an intensity she'd never seen before. Not cold now, but burning. You work for this family. You are under our protection, and I will not allow some desperate social climber to destroy your reputation for his own advancement. But the scandal will be far worse if we appear to be hiding. If we don't attend, society will assume Hale's stories are true. Adrian's strategic mind was clearly working now, calculating angles and consequences. But if we appear in public together, if my mother and I make it clear that you have our full support and confidence, Hale's lies lose their power. The Duchess nodded slowly. The boy's right. We stand together or we all fall separately. Clara looked between them, the formidable Duchess and her son, both ready to go to war on her behalf, and felt something break inside her chest. These people barely knew her. She was nothing to them, really, just an employee, a temporary companion. Yet they were willing to risk social censure to defend her. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for me? Adrian moved to stand in front of her chair, and when he spoke, his voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it. Because you're right. I have been a coward. I've been hiding for 3 years while the world moved on without me. But you've been fighting every single day just to survive, and you've never once given up or compromised who you are. He paused. You asked me to be brave enough to live again. The least I can do is be brave enough to stand beside you when you need it. Clara felt tears burning in her eyes and blinked them back furiously. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Don't. This will be unpleasant. Adrian straightened, his posture shifting into something harder, more commanding. Tomorrow night, you'll attend as my mother's companion. You'll hold your head high, ignore the whispers, and trust that we have a plan. What plan? Clara asked. The smile that crossed Adrian's face was sharp and cold, and absolutely ruthless. Victor Hale wants to play games with reputations? Then he's chosen the wrong opponent. Tomorrow night, he'll learn that the Marble Duke can be very dangerous when someone threatens what's his. The words sent a shiver down Clara's spine, partly fear, partly something else entirely. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation. The Duchess insisted Clara wear one of her own gowns from before she went into mourning, a deep sapphire silk that had been altered to fit Clara's smaller frame. It was the most beautiful thing Clara had ever worn, elegant and expensive and utterly beyond anything she could have afforded. "You'll represent this family tonight," the Duchess said, as her lady's maid arranged Clara's hair into an elaborate style. "You must look the part." Clara barely recognized herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked confident, elegant, powerful, everything she'd pretended to be invisible to avoid. At 8 o'clock, they departed for Lady Pemberton's townhouse in the Thornfield carriage, the ducal crest emblazoned on the door for all to see. The Duchess sat across from Clara and Adrian, her face set in lines of steel determination. Adrian sat beside Clara, close enough that she could feel the heat of him through layers of fabric, his expression unreadable. "Remember," he said quietly, as the carriage rolled through London's streets, "you've done nothing wrong. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Whatever Hale says, whatever society whispers, you hold your head high, and let us handle the rest." "I'm not good at letting others fight my battles," Clara admitted. "I've noticed. But tonight, trust me." His hand found hers in the darkness of the carriage, squeezed once, and released. "Please." The simple plea in his voice made her nod. Lady Pemberton's salon was already crowded when they arrived, the cream of society packed into elegant rooms that hummed with gossip and speculation. The moment the Thornfield party was announced, conversation stopped like someone had cut the strings on a puppet. Every eye turned toward them. Clara felt the weight of those stares like physical pressure, saw the calculating looks, the raised eyebrows, the barely concealed smirks. They were all waiting to see if the rumors were true, waiting to witness her humiliation. Adrian offered his arm, and Clara took it, feeling the solid strength of him beside her. They entered together, the Duchess on Adrian's other side, and the crowd parted before them like the Red Sea. Lady Pemberton rushed forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your Grace!" "Duchess, what a delightful surprise. I wasn't certain you'd attend." "Wouldn't miss it," Adrian said coolly. "I hear there's to be quite the entertainment tonight." Lady Pemberton's smile faltered. Before she could respond, a voice called out from across the room. "Thornfield, good to see you out in society again." Victor Hale emerged from the crowd like a shark scenting blood. He was handsome in a superficial way, golden hair, blue eyes, expensive clothes, but Clara saw the calculation in his gaze, the predatory gleam. "Mr. Hale." Adrian's voice was flat, emotionless. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "No, but I know you by reputation, of course. The legendary Marble Duke." Hale's smile was all teeth. "Though I must say, I'm surprised to see you here, and with such interesting company." His eyes slid to Clara with unmistakable disdain. "Miss Whitmore is my mother's companion," Adrian said. "I fail to see what's interesting about that." "Oh, I think you know." Hale's voice carried, designed to reach the listening crowd. "Miss Whitmore and I have a history, you see. I feel it's my duty to warn you. She's not what she appears to be." The room had gone absolutely silent. Clara felt her nails digging into Adrian's arm, felt the panic rising in her throat. "Is that so?" Adrian's voice remained perfectly controlled. "And what, pray tell, is she?" "A fortune hunter, a liar, a woman who deliberately misrepresented her circumstances to trap me into an engagement." Hale was warming to his theme now, playing to his audience. "When I discovered the truth, that her father's estate was bankrupt, that she had nothing, she became quite vindictive. And now she's clearly set her sights on your family's wealth. I'm only trying to protect you from the same deception I suffered." Clara opened her mouth to defend herself, but Adrian's hand covered hers on his arm, a silent message. Wait. That's a fascinating story, mister. Hale, Adrian said, his voice like silk over steel. There's just one problem with it. Oh? And what's that? It's demonstrably false. Adrian gestured, and a man Clara didn't recognize stepped forward from the crowd, middle-aged, distinguished, with the look of a solicitor. This is Mr. Pembroke, my family's attorney. Mr. Pembroke, would you care to share what you discovered? The solicitor cleared his throat. Certainly, Your Grace. I took the liberty of investigating Mr. Hale's claims about Miss Whitmore. What I found was illuminating. Mr. Hale did indeed court Miss Whitmore for approximately 3 months before her father's death. During that time, he proposed marriage no fewer than 4 times, despite her repeated refusals. Hale's face went white. That's not— I have the letters, Pembroke continued calmly. Letters Mr. Hale wrote to Miss Whitmore's father, pressing his suit, promising devotion. Letters he wrote to Miss Whitmore herself, declaring his love. He pulled several folded papers from his coat. Shall I read them aloud? They're quite passionate. The crowd murmured, sensing blood in the water. When Mr. Whitmore died and his debts became public knowledge, Pembroke went on, Mr. Hale withdrew his suit immediately. He did not, however, withdraw quietly. He spread rumors that Miss Whitmore had trapped him with false promises, despite the fact that she had never accepted his proposals. Where did you get those letters? Hale's voice had gone shrill. Miss Whitmore kept them. She also kept detailed journals of the courtship, including dates, locations, and witnesses to your proposals, all of which I have verified. Pembroke's smile was thin. Did you really think the Duke of Thornfield would allow accusations against a member of his household without investigation? Clara stared at Adrian in shock. He'd had her investigated, had dug through her past, found evidence, prepared a defense, all without telling her. You see, Mr. Hale, Adrian said, his voice carrying across the silent room, I protect what's mine, and Miss Whitmore is under my protection. So your little scheme to elevate yourself by destroying her reputation has failed rather spectacularly. This is absurd, Hale began. What's absurd, the Duchess interjected, her voice cutting, is a desperate man attempting to insert himself into society by slandering an innocent woman. What's absurd is thinking the Thornfield family wouldn't defend its own. What's absurd, Mr. Hale, is you. The crowd turned on Hale like a pack of wolves. Clara watched as his face crumbled, saw the moment he realized he'd miscalculated catastrophically. He'd gambled that the Thornfields wouldn't care enough about a poor companion to defend her publicly. He'd been wrong. I think it's time you left, Mr. Hale, Lady Pemberton said coldly. Her salon was in chaos, her guests whispering furiously, and she clearly blamed Hale for the disaster. You're no longer welcome here. Hale looked around the room, seeking allies and finding none. His eyes landed on Clara one last time, filled with such venom that she took an involuntary step back. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yes, Adrian replied, his voice as cold as she'd ever heard it. It is. If you speak Miss Whitmore's name again, if you even think about approaching her, I will destroy you so thoroughly that no one in England will receive you. Have I made myself clear? Hale's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He turned and fled the salon, leaving a wake of scandalized whispers behind him. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lady Pemberton clapped her hands together, breaking the spell. Well, I think we could all use some champagne after that excitement. Please, everyone, the refreshments are in the next room. The crowd dispersed, conversations resuming at twice the previous volume. Clara stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. Come, the Duchess said gently, touching her arm. Let's get you somewhere quiet. They retreated to a small sitting room away from the main salon. The moment the door closed, Clara's legs gave out and she sank into a chair, shaking. You defended me, she whispered, looking up at Adrian. You had me investigated, gathered evidence, orchestrated that entire confrontation. Why? Adrian knelt in front of her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. Because you were right. I've been a coward for 3 years, but standing up for you, protecting you, fighting for someone other than myself, that felt like being alive again. Clara stared at him, this man who'd been frozen solid just days ago, now blazing with intensity and purpose. You did this for yourself? I did it for both of us. His hand found hers, held it gently. You've been fighting to thaw me, Clara. Let me help you fight your battles in return. The way he said her name, her first name, without the formal miss, sent warmth flooding through her chest. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say you'll trust me. Say you'll let me be the man you seem to think I can be. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Say you'll stay. Before Clara could answer, the door burst open and a servant rushed in, his face pale. Your Grace, there's been an incident. Mr. Hale. What about him? Adrian stood, his hand still holding Clara's. He collapsed outside the house. The footman tried to assist him, but he was raving, violent. He struck one of them before running into the street. He was nearly trampled by a carriage. Where is he now? The night watch has taken him to the hospital, Your Grace. But before they took him away, he kept shouting threats. Against Miss Whitmore. He said... The servant swallowed hard. He said she'd pay for ruining him, that he'd make sure of it. Clara felt ice settle in her stomach. Adrian's hand tightened on hers. Double the guard at Thornfield House, he ordered. No one comes or goes without being thoroughly checked. And I want someone watching Miss Whitmore at all times when she's not in the house. Adrian, that's excessive, Clara began. A man who's lost everything is dangerous, Adrian cut her off, his voice hard. A man who blames you for that loss is deadly. Until we know he's no longer a threat, you stay protected. The Duchess nodded grimly. The boy's right. Hale has nothing left to lose. That makes him unpredictable. They returned to Thornfield House in tense silence, the earlier triumph soured by Hale's threats. Adrian insisted on walking Clara to her room personally, checking the locks on her windows, posting a footman in the hallway outside. This is ridiculous, Clara protested. I'm perfectly safe in your house. Humor me. Adrian stood in her doorway, backlit by the hallway lamps, and Clara saw the fear underneath his control. I just found something worth protecting. I'm not losing it to a madman's revenge. Something worth protecting. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Good night, Clara, Adrian said softly. Good night, Your Grace. Adrian. My name is Adrian. Good night, Adrian. He smiled, a real smile, small and uncertain, but genuine, and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Clara changed for bed in a daze, her mind spinning. Everything had changed tonight. Adrian had defended her publicly, had shown the world that she mattered to him, had admitted that protecting her made him feel alive again, and Victor Hale had threatened her life. Clara climbed into bed but couldn't sleep, listening to the footman's quiet movements in the hallway, the house settling around her, the distant sounds of London at night. She was safe here. Adrian had made sure of it, but for how long? And what happened when a frozen man began to thaw and discovered what lay beneath the ice? Not just pain and grief, but something deeper. Something neither of them had anticipated? Clara stared at the ceiling and wondered if she'd just traded one kind of danger for another. Outside her window, a shadow moved across the garden wall, quick and furtive, before disappearing into the darkness. The footman in the hall never noticed, and in her room, Clara Whitmore, the woman who'd challenged a duke and survived, finally fell asleep, unaware that her greatest battle was just beginning. The scream shattered the pre-dawn silence like glass. Clara jerked awake, her heart hammering, disoriented in the darkness. For a moment she thought she'd dreamed it, until she heard running footsteps in the hallway, urgent voices, the Duchess shouting orders. She threw on her wrapper and flung open the door. The footman who'd been posted outside was gone. The hallway blazed with hastily lit lamps, and servants rushed past carrying buckets of water. Fire! One of them gasped as Clara caught her arm. In the east wing, miss. Started in one of the storage rooms. Clara's blood went cold. She ran toward the commotion, her bare feet silent on the carpet, and found chaos. Smoke billowed from a doorway 3 rooms down from the main library, acrid and black. Adrian stood in the midst of it all, coatless and disheveled, directing footmen with sharp commands while the Duchess coordinated the female staff in a bucket brigade from the nearest water source. Get those tapestries down before they catch, Adrian ordered. Williams, check the adjacent rooms for spread. Move. Clara didn't hesitate. She grabbed a bucket from the line and joined the brigade, passing water forward with shaking hands. The smoke burned her lungs, made her eyes stream, but she kept moving, kept passing buckets, kept fighting. It took an hour to extinguish the flames. By the time the last ember was doused, the eastern storage room was a blackened ruin, and the hallway reeked of smoke and char. Miraculously, the fire hadn't spread beyond that single room. Adrian's face was streaked with soot, his shirt ruined, his hands blistered from beating out flames. He stood in the destroyed doorway, staring at the damage with an expression Clara couldn't read. "How did it start?" the Duchess demanded, her voice sharp despite her own disheveled state. "Deliberately." Adrian pointed to what remained of the doorframe. Even through the char, Clara could see the splintered wood where the lock had been forced. "Someone broke in, started the fire, and left." The words fell like stones into cold water. "Hale," Clara whispered. "We don't know that," the Duchess began. "Yes, we do." Adrian's voice was flat, certain. "This room is directly below Clara's bedroom. The fire would have spread upward if we hadn't caught it in time. This wasn't random destruction. This was attempted murder." Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She'd been sleeping peacefully while someone tried to burn her alive. If the scream, she still didn't know who'd screamed, hadn't woken the house, if they'd been minutes slower responding, if the fire had spread to the main structure. "I'm calling the magistrate," Adrian said, "and I'm hiring private guards. This ends now." "No." Clara's voice came out stronger than she felt. "This ends when I leave." Adrian spun to face her, his eyes blazing. "Absolutely not." "He's targeting me, Adrian. As long as I'm here, everyone in this house is in danger. The staff, your mother, you." I said no. He crossed to her in 3 strides, gripping her shoulders with soot-stained hands. "Do you understand what you're suggesting? That we let him win? That we let fear dictate our choices? That I watch you walk away because protecting you is inconvenient? I'm suggesting that my presence is putting people at risk. And I'm telling you that you're not leaving." His voice dropped, became almost gentle despite its intensity. "You asked me to be brave, Clara. You pushed me to feel again, to live again. Did you think I'd learn those lessons and then abandon you the moment things became difficult? This isn't difficult, it's dangerous." Then we face the danger together. His thumbs traced small circles on her shoulders, anchoring her. "I will not lose someone else I care about to senseless violence. I won't let fear win again. And I absolutely will not let you sacrifice yourself to protect me." The raw honesty in his voice, the naked emotion on his smoke-stained face, stole Clara's breath. This was not the Marble Duke. This was a man stripped bare, choosing connection over safety, choosing her over comfort. "I care about you too," she whispered. "That's why I have to consider." "No, you have to trust me. Trust that I can protect you. Trust that you're worth protecting." His forehead touched hers, and Clara felt his breath against her lips. "Trust that I'm not going to freeze up and fail you like I failed James." The confession broke something open in Clara's chest. She reached up and cupped his face, feeling the rough stubble, the warmth of his skin beneath the soot. "You didn't fail, James. You can't keep punishing yourself for an accident." "I know. I'm learning." His eyes searched hers. "You're teaching me. So stay. Fight with me instead of running from me." The Duchess cleared her throat pointedly. "As touching as this is, we're all standing in a smoke-damaged hallway in our nightclothes. Perhaps we could continue this conversation after we've cleaned up and called the authorities." Adrian stepped back, and Clara saw color rise in his cheeks, the first genuine blush she'd witnessed on the composed Duke. "Of course. Mother is right. Clara, go back to your room. Lock the door and don't open it for anyone but me or my mother. I'll post 2 guards outside. The sun's almost up. I won't be able to sleep anyway. Then rest, read, I don't care. Just stay safe while I deal with this." Clara nodded and made her way back through the damaged hallway, acutely aware of Adrian's eyes following her until she disappeared around the corner. The magistrate arrived at 7, examined the scene with grim efficiency, and confirmed what they already knew: arson, attempted murder, and a suspect who'd fled before being caught. Constables were dispatched to search for Victor Hale, but no one held much hope of finding him quickly. A man with money and desperation could disappear into London's shadows easily enough. By noon, Thornfield House had transformed into a fortress. Private guards patrolled the perimeter. Every entrance was secured. Staff were questioned about strangers or unusual occurrences. And Clara was effectively confined to the main floor under watchful eyes. She chafed at the restrictions, but understood the necessity. What she didn't understand was Adrian's sudden intensity whenever he looked at her, like he was memorizing her features, storing up images against future loss. 3 days passed in tense waiting. The fire damage was repaired. The guards maintained their watch. Life continued with careful precision. But something had shifted between Clara and Adrian. He sought her company constantly now, abandoning his study to sit in the library while she read to his mother, joining them for meals, walking with her in the walled garden under guard supervision. The conversation flowed easily. Books they'd read, places they'd traveled, memories of happier times. He told her about James, about their childhood adventures, about the brother who'd been light to his darkness. And Clara told him about her father, about the slow financial collapse that had taken years to complete, about the moment she'd realized she was truly alone in the world. "That's when you learn to be invisible," Adrian said one afternoon as they sat in the garden, surrounded by overgrown roses that no one had properly tended since the accident. It seemed safer than being seen. Being seen meant being vulnerable to judgment, dismissal, cruelty. Clara touched a rose bloom, its petals soft against her fingers. Being invisible meant surviving. But you were never truly invisible. You just convinced yourself you were. Adrian plucked the rose she'd been touching, careful of thorns, and offered it to her. "I saw you the moment you challenged my mother. I just didn't want to admit I was capable of seeing anymore." Clara took the rose, her fingers brushing his. "And now? Now I see you clearly, and I'm terrified of losing what I see." The confession hung between them, heavy with meaning. Clara opened her mouth to respond, but a commotion at the garden gate interrupted, raised voices, running footsteps, and then Adrian's head of security appeared, supporting a disheveled, bleeding man. Victor Hale. Adrian was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between Clara and the injured man. "What is this?" "He walked up to the front gate, Your Grace, surrendered himself, said he needed to speak with you and Miss Whitmore." The guard's voice was skeptical. "He's unarmed, but we searched him thoroughly." Hale looked nothing like the polished fortune hunter from Lady Pemberton's salon. His clothes were torn and filthy, his face bruised and swollen, one eye nearly shut. He swayed on his feet, clutching his ribs. "Please," he rasped, "I need to tell you, need to explain." "You tried to burn down my house," Adrian said flatly. "You tried to murder Clara. You're going to prison." "No, yes, I started the fire, but not to hurt anyone. I just wanted to scare her, make her leave so you'd see she wasn't worth protecting." Hale's words tumbled out desperately. "But then I saw the flames spread and I realized what I'd done and I tried to come back, tried to warn you, but the guards were already there and I panicked." "You fled the scene of your crime," Adrian interrupted. "For 3 days you've been hiding while we wondered if you'd try again." "I wasn't hiding, I was being held." Hale touched his swollen eye, winced. "By people who don't like it when debts go unpaid." Clara felt a chill. "What people?" "Moneylenders, the kind who break bones when you can't pay." Hale laughed bitterly. "I borrowed from them to finance my entrance back into society, to buy clothes and lodging and bribes to get me invited to the right parties. I thought if I could marry well this season, I could pay them back. But after that disaster at Lady Pemberton's, after you destroyed my reputation, no one would receive me. The lenders came to collect, and when I couldn't pay," he gestured at his bruises. "So you started a fire out of spite and desperation," Adrian said, his voice cold. "And now you expect what? Sympathy? Forgiveness?" "I expect prison. I know what I've done." Hale's gaze shifted to Clara, and she saw genuine remorse in his battered face. "But I needed to tell you, both of you, that I'm sorry. I blamed you for my failures, Miss Whitmore, when the truth is I destroyed myself. You never lied to me. You never promised me anything. I invented a fantasy and then hated you when reality didn't match it." Clara stared at him, this man who'd courted her, abandoned her, tried to destroy her, and now stood broken before her seeking absolution. She didn't know if she could give. "Why come back?" she asked quietly. "Why not just run?" "Because running didn't make the guilt go away. Because I kept seeing your face in the ballroom when I was spreading those lies, kept imagining you trapped in that fire I'd started, and I couldn't—" His voice broke. "I couldn't live with it. So I came back to face what I'd done. To give you the truth, even if it's too late to matter." Adrian exchanged a glance with his head of security. "Take him inside, get him cleaned up and fed. Then we're calling the magistrate." "Your Grace," Hale began. "You'll stand trial for arson and attempted murder," Adrian said firmly. "But I'll testify to your remorse and voluntary surrender. It may reduce your sentence. That's the best I can offer." Hale nodded slowly. "It's more than I deserve, thank you." As the guards led him away, Clara sank back onto the garden bench, her legs suddenly unsteady. He could have kept running. Why risk coming back? Because guilt is a powerful thing. Adrian sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Because living with what you've done can be worse than facing the consequences. I understand that better than most. Clara turned to look at him. "You're not like him, Adrian. You didn't hurt anyone deliberately. You didn't run from your responsibilities. No, I just froze myself so thoroughly that I stopped living entirely. That's its own kind of running." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "But I'm trying to stop. Thanks to you." Before Clara could respond, the Duchess appeared at the garden gate, her face alight with something Clara hadn't seen before: satisfaction. "You'll want to come inside," she announced. "Both of you. We have visitors." The drawing room held an unexpected assembly. Lady Pemberton, accompanied by the Duchess of Waverley and 3 other prominent society matrons, all watching Clara and Adrian enter with expressions ranging from curiosity to approval. "Your Graces," Lady Pemberton began, inclining her head to Adrian and his mother before focusing on Clara. "Miss Whitmore, we owe you an apology." Clara blinked. "I'm sorry?" "We've spent the past 3 days making inquiries about Mr. Hale," the Duchess of Waverley explained, her tone matter-of-fact. "Speaking with his former associates, his creditors, anyone who'd had dealings with him. What we discovered was illuminating." Lady Pemberton took over. "Victor Hale has a history of targeting young women from good families who've fallen on hard times. You were not his first victim, Miss Whitmore, nor were you the only one he slandered when his schemes failed. We found 3 other women he'd courted and abandoned," another matron added, all of them left with damaged reputations and no means to defend themselves. One was forced to leave the country entirely. Clara's hand tightened on Adrian's arm. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because we were wrong." Lady Pemberton's admission was stiff but genuine. "We listened to a charming man spread vicious lies, and we didn't question them because he told us what we were predisposed to believe, that a poor woman must be scheming to elevate herself. We judged you without evidence, and for that, I apologize." "We all apologize," the Duchess of Waverley affirmed, and the other matrons murmured agreement. "Moreover," Lady Pemberton continued, "we wanted you to know that society's opinion of you has changed considerably. The Duke's defense of you at my salon was noted. His continued support has been observed, and your courage in remaining here despite Mr. Hale's attacks has impressed many people. Including us," the Duchess of Waverley added. "Any woman who can manage the Dowager Duchess of Thornfield and civilize the Marble Duke deserves respect, not censure." The Dowager Duchess made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I'm not sure whether to be insulted or amused." "Be amused, Evelyn," the Duchess of Waverley advised. "Your son is smiling again. We've all noticed. That's Miss Whitmore's doing, and we're grateful for it." Clara looked at Adrian and found him watching her with an expression of such warmth that her breath caught. He was smiling, not the small, uncertain curve from before, but a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Yes," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving Clara's. "It is her doing. She's changed everything." The matrons exchanged knowing glances, and Lady Pemberton smiled. "Well, we won't keep you. We simply wanted to extend our apologies and make it clear that Miss Whitmore is welcome in our homes and gatherings. The invitations we're sending to the Thornfield household will include her name specifically." After they left, Clara stood in the drawing room trying to process what had just happened. Society, the same society that had dismissed her, ignored her, allowed her to be slandered, had just apologized and welcomed her back. "I don't understand," she said. "Why now? Why the sudden change?" "Because you proved them wrong," the Duchess said simply. "You didn't run when Hale attacked you. You didn't hide or compromise or bend. You stood firm, and people respect strength. And because my son has made his regard for you abundantly clear," she added with a pointed look at Adrian, "society follows power, and the Duke of Thornfield defending you sends a message." Clara turned to Adrian. "Is that what this is? A political statement?" "No." He crossed to her, took both her hands in his. "This is me finally being honest about what I feel, about who you are to me." "And who am I?" Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "You're the woman who saw through my ice to the person underneath, the woman who challenged me to feel again, to live again, to be brave enough to connect instead of hiding in grief." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "You're the woman I'm falling in love with, Clara. Possibly the woman I've been falling in love with since you called me a coward on a ballroom dance floor." The words hung in the air, impossible and perfect and terrifying. "I'm still poor," Clara whispered. "I'm still nobody. I still have nothing to offer but myself." "You're not nobody. You're Clara Whitmore, the bravest person I know." Adrian smiled, and it reached his eyes, warming them to something beyond ice. "And yourself is everything I want." The Duchess cleared her throat. "I'm going to leave you two alone before this becomes even more inappropriate than it already is. Clara, dear, try to remember that we have servants who gossip, and at least maintain some decorum." She swept from the room, leaving Clara and Adrian standing in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. "I don't know how to do this," Clara admitted. "I don't know how to be with someone, how to trust this, how to believe it won't disappear." "Neither do I. I've been frozen for 3 years. I'm out of practice at being human, let alone being in love." Adrian pulled her closer until they were standing almost touching. "But I'm willing to learn if you are. What if I hurt you? What if I'm not enough? What if you are? What if we're exactly what each other needs?" He cupped her face in his hands, gentle, despite his strength. "I'm not asking for perfection, Clara. I'm asking for honesty, for partnership, for someone who'll keep pushing me to be better while I support you in being everything you already are." Clara felt tears burning in her eyes, not from sadness or fear, but from the overwhelming possibility of hope. "I spent 3 years being invisible. I don't know if I remember how to be seen." "Then I'll remind you every day." Adrian's forehead touched hers. "You're brilliant, Clara. Strong and honest and impossibly brave. You're seen, you matter, and I love you." The tears spilled over, and Clara laughed through them, a sound of pure relief and joy. "I love you too, even when you were being insufferable and frozen." "Especially then?" "Especially then." Adrian kissed her, and Clara felt the last of his ice melt away. His lips were warm, gentle, questioning rather than demanding. She answered by wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him back with all the emotion she'd been holding in. 3 years of invisibility, weeks of uncertainty, and now this sudden perfect certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "The house is going to be insufferable with gossip," he murmured. "Let them gossip. I'm done being invisible." "Good. Because I intend to make very sure everyone knows you're mine." Clara pulled back to look at him. "Yours? If you'll have me. If you'll stay. If you'll—" He paused, seeming to gather courage. "If you'll marry me." The world tilted. "Adrian, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few weeks. I know you probably think I'm mad." The words tumbled out, uncharacteristically rushed. "But I've wasted 3 years being frozen, Clara. I don't want to waste another minute pretending I don't know exactly what I want. And what I want is you, as my wife, my partner, my conscience, and my courage, and my reason for living." Clara stared at him, this man who'd been marble and ice, now blazing with life and hope and love. This man who'd defended her, protected her, chosen her when she'd had nothing to offer but herself. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes?" Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll stay. Yes to all of it. Clara laughed, the sound bright and free. Though your mother is going to say I told you so. She already has, multiple times. Adrian pulled her close again, buried his face in her hair. I don't care. Let her gloat. Let society gossip. Let the whole world have opinions. You're mine and I'm yours, and that's all that matters. They stood wrapped together in the drawing room sunlight, two people who'd been lost finding their way home in each other. Outside, the guards maintained their watch. In the kitchen, the staff whispered and smiled. In her sitting room, the Duchess read the announcement she'd already prepared for the Times, because of course she'd known this was coming. And somewhere in London, Victor Hale sat in a cell awaiting trial, his crimes catching up with him at last. But in Thornfield House, the ice had finally melted. The Marble Duke was learning to feel again, and the invisible woman had become impossible to ignore. Together, they stood at the beginning of something neither had thought possible, a future built not on duty or survival or careful control, but on love freely chosen and bravely claimed. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be challenges ahead, adjustments to make, society to navigate, and ghosts to finally lay to rest. But they would face it together. And that made all the difference. But in the moment, Clara whispered yes, as Adrian pulled her close with hands that still trembled slightly. Neither of them noticed the shadow that flickered across the Dowager Duchess's face as she stood in the hallway just beyond the drawing room door. Evelyn Blackthorne had orchestrated this entire affair with the precision of a general deploying troops. She'd hired Clara specifically to crack her son's frozen shell. She'd engineered their encounters, defended Clara against society's whispers, and pushed them together with calculated determination. She'd gotten exactly what she wanted. So why did triumph taste like ashes in her mouth? The Duchess turned away from the drawing room and made her way slowly to her private sitting room, her cane tapping against marble floors that had witnessed 3 generations of Blackthorns. Inside, she poured herself a brandy with steady hands and sat by the window overlooking the wild garden. She'd saved her son. That was what mattered. But at what cost to the girl? The engagement announcement appeared in the Times 3 days later, causing a sensation that rippled through London society like a stone thrown into still water. The Marble Duke, who'd refused all connection for 3 years, was marrying his mother's companion, a woman with no fortune, no family, no prospects beyond what his regard bestowed upon her. The gossips had a field day. He's rescuing her from poverty, they whispered in drawing rooms and ballrooms. She's trapped him with feminine wiles, others countered. The Dowager orchestrated the whole thing, the more astute observed. Mark my words, this is Evelyn Blackthorne's doing from start to finish. They were all right and all wrong. Clara endured the gossip with the same steady courage she'd shown from the beginning, attending social events on Adrian's arm with her head held high and her hand steady in his. She smiled at the whispers, ignored the speculation, and gradually, inevitably, won over even the harshest critics through sheer force of genuineness. Because Clara Whitmore didn't pretend to be anything she wasn't. She didn't put on airs or attempt to hide her humble circumstances. When asked about her background, she answered honestly. When confronted with rudeness, she responded with grace that made the rude party look foolish. And when people watched her interact with Adrian, they saw something that couldn't be faked. Genuine love, freely given and gratefully received. She's good for him, Lady Pemberton admitted to the Duchess of Waverley at a musicale 4 weeks after the engagement. Look at him. He's actually laughing. When was the last time any of us heard the Duke laugh? 3 years ago before the accident, the Duchess of Waverley replied. The girl has performed a miracle. But miracles, as Clara was learning, came with complications. The wedding was planned for late autumn, giving Clara time to adjust to her new position and society time to accept it. The Duchess insisted on providing Clara's trousseau, an act of generosity that felt increasingly like control. Dresses were ordered, jewels selected, furnishings chosen for the Duchess's suite that Clara would occupy after the wedding. Clara went along with it all, grateful but increasingly uncomfortable with how little input she had in decisions that would shape her future. Every suggestion she made was gently redirected by the Dowager, every preference overruled with impeccable logic and unassailable taste. The sapphire silk is more appropriate for your coloring than the green, dear. These pearls are more suitable for a duchess than those garnets. The Louis XIV furniture is more in keeping with the house's aesthetic than the simpler pieces you preferred. It was all done with love, Clara knew. The Duchess wanted her to succeed, wanted her to fit seamlessly into the role she'd occupy. But increasingly, Clara felt like she was being shaped and molded into someone else's vision of what the Duchess of Thornfield should be. She tried to talk to Adrian about it one afternoon in the library, where they'd taken to spending quiet hours reading together, or pretending to read while stealing glances at each other like besotted children. "Your mother is very involved in the wedding preparations," Clara said carefully, closing her book. Adrian looked up from his own reading, a smile already forming. "Mother enjoys organizing. It gives her purpose. Is she being too overbearing?" "Not overbearing exactly, just certain. About everything. My dress, my jewels, my opinions on furniture and flowers, and the guest list." Clara paused. "Sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing again, becoming invisible under the weight of what everyone else thinks I should be." Adrian set aside his book immediately, his full attention on her. "Tell me specifically, what do you want that you're not getting?" "I want simple flowers at the wedding, not elaborate arrangements. I want to wear my mother's pearls, not the Thornfield diamonds. I want to feel like myself walking down that aisle, not like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life." "Then that's what you'll have." Adrian's voice was firm. "I'll speak to my mother." "No." Clara stopped him with a hand on his arm. "I need to speak to her myself. I need to learn to stand up for what I want, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable." Adrian studied her face for a long moment. "The girl who challenged me on a dance floor is still in there. She never left. She's just been trying very hard to be grateful and agreeable and not cause trouble." Clara smiled ruefully. "Turns out I'm terrible at being agreeable." "Thank heaven for that." Adrian pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "Go talk to my mother. Be honest. She'll respect you for it." But would she? Clara found the Duchess in her sitting room that evening, reviewing seating charts for the wedding breakfast with the concentration of a military strategist planning a siege. "Your Grace, may I speak with you?" The Duchess looked up, smiled. "Of course, dear. Come sit. I was just trying to decide whether to seat Lady Pemberton near the Duke of Waverley. They despise each other, but the resulting entertainment might be worth the breach of etiquette." Clara sat, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "I wanted to discuss the wedding preparations." "Excellent. I've been meaning to show you the revised menu. Cook has outdone herself with the dessert options. Actually, I wanted to discuss my role in making decisions about the wedding." The Duchess's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in her eyes. "Your role?" "Yes, I appreciate everything you've done, truly, but I feel like I'm being swept along by arrangements I have no control over. I want to make some choices myself." "Such as?" The Duchess's tone was pleasant, but Clara heard the steel underneath. "The flowers, the jewelry, the guest list." Clara took a breath. "My life." Silence filled the room like water rising. "I see." The Duchess set aside her seating chart with deliberate precision. "And you think I've been controlling these things?" "I think you've been making decisions for me out of love and good intentions, but they're still my decisions to make." "You're marrying a duke, Clara. That comes with certain expectations, certain standards that must be maintained. I'm trying to help you navigate a world you weren't raised for." "I know, and I'm grateful. But I'm not a child to be managed or a project to be completed. I'm a woman who spent 3 years learning to survive, and I won't trade one kind of invisibility for another." The Duchess's face remained perfectly composed, but Clara saw the flash of hurt in her eyes. "You think I'm trying to make you invisible?" "I think you're trying to make me into the Duchess you imagine Adrian needs. But Adrian fell in love with me, not some polished version you've created. Adrian needs a wife who can function in his world. Adrian needs a wife who's honest with him, who challenges him, who refuses to pretend to be something she's not." Clara leaned forward. "That's who I am, Your Grace. That's who I've always been. And if I lose that trying to become the perfect Duchess, I'll lose the very thing that made him love me in the first place." The Duchess stared at her for a long moment, and Clara saw the calculation happening behind those sharp eyes. Finally she spoke, and her voice was colder than Clara had ever heard it. You're quite right, of course. How foolish of me to assume you needed guidance. After all, you've navigated society so successfully on your own. The sarcasm was delicate, precise, and utterly devastating. Please make whatever choices you like. Wear your mother's pearls. Have wilted daisies if that's what you prefer. Invite the chimney sweep if it pleases you. I'm sure society will be utterly charmed by your authentic simplicity. Clara felt the words like slaps. Your Grace, I orchestrated this entire situation, you know. The Duchess's control cracked, just slightly. I hired you specifically to save my son. I pushed you together, defended you, opened doors that would have remained firmly closed to a penniless companion. I gave you everything, a position, a home, a future, and this is how you repay me? By suggesting I'm trying to control you? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Because it sounds very much like ingratitude dressed up as independence. The Duchess stood, leaning heavily on her cane. I've spent 3 years watching my son die by inches. I've sacrificed my own grief over James to focus on saving Adrian. And when I finally succeed, when I finally give him a reason to live again, you accuse me of being manipulative. The accusation hung in the air, and Clara felt her own anger rising to meet it. I never asked you to save me, she said quietly. I never asked to be your project or your tool for fixing your son. I needed employment, yes, but I didn't sell my soul for it, and I won't apologize for wanting to make my own choices about my own wedding. Then make them. The Duchess's voice was ice. Plan your simple wedding. Wear your simple jewels. Be your authentic self. And when society tears you apart for not meeting their expectations, don't come crying to me for help. I won't, because I never needed you to fight my battles. I've been doing that on my own for years. The moment the words left Clara's mouth, she knew they were too far. The Duchess's face went white, then red, then settled into a mask of perfect aristocratic disdain. Get out of my sight. Your Grace, I said get out. And you can tell my son that I require my companion to actually perform her duties, not simply use the position as a stepping stone to greater things. If you cannot manage that, I'm sure we can find someone who can. The threat was clear. Fall in line or lose everything. Clara stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. I'll perform my duties faithfully, as I always have, but I will not be silent about my own wedding, my own life, my own future. Not for you, not for anyone. She walked out of the sitting room with her head high, but once the door closed behind her, she leaned against the wall and fought back tears. Adrian found her there 10 minutes later. The entire staff heard the shouting, he said quietly, pulling her into his arms. What happened? Clara told him, the words tumbling out between tears she could no longer hold back. She's right, Adrian, about all of it. She did give me everything. She did orchestrate this. And I just threw it back in her face because I wanted to choose my own flowers. It's not about the flowers, Adrian said, stroking her hair. It's about agency. About being seen as a person, not a chess piece to be moved around the board. But she's hurt. I hurt her, and she's right that I owe her. You owe her gratitude, not your autonomy. Adrian pulled back to look at her. My mother is brilliant and generous and utterly ruthless when she wants something. She orchestrated our relationship with the best of intentions, but that doesn't give her the right to control the rest of your life. What do? You give her time to cool down. You plan the wedding you want. And you remember that you're marrying me, not my mother. He kissed her forehead. We'll get through this, together. But the rift with the Duchess didn't heal easily. For 2 weeks, Evelyn Blackthorne maintained icy politeness toward Clara, performing her role as mother of the groom with perfect courtesy and absolute emotional distance. She attended dress fittings and menu tastings and planning sessions with Clara and smiled and offered opinions when asked and radiated disapproval like cold winter sun. Adrian tried to mediate, but his mother shut him down with elegant efficiency. This is between Miss Whitmore and myself. Stay out of it. Clara felt the weight of the Duchess's disappointment like a physical burden. She second-guessed every decision, wondered if she'd been ungrateful, considered apologizing and accepting the Duchess's control just to restore peace. But every time she considered backing down, she remembered what invisibility had cost her. She remembered 3 years of silence, of making herself small, of disappearing to survive. She'd promised herself she was done disappearing. The crisis came 6 weeks before the wedding, at a garden party hosted by the Duchess of Waverley. Clara attended on Adrian's arm, wearing one of the dresses the Dowager Duchess had selected. Because even in rebellion, Clara was practical enough to acknowledge that the Duchess had impeccable taste. The party was elegant, perfectly orchestrated, and utterly exhausting. Clara smiled and chatted and fielded questions about the wedding with practiced grace, all while feeling the Dowager's eyes on her from across the garden. She was talking with Lady Pemberton about flower arrangements. Clara had indeed chosen simple seasonal blooms over elaborate exotic displays, when a commotion near the refreshment table drew everyone's attention. A woman had collapsed. Clara pushed through the crowd without thinking, her instincts overriding social protocol. The woman was middle-aged, well-dressed, and gasping for breath with a terrifying wheezing sound. "Give her space," Clara commanded, dropping to her knees beside the stricken woman. "Someone send for a doctor. Now." "What's happening?" Adrian appeared at her side. "I don't know. She can't breathe." Clara looked at the woman's swollen face, her reddening skin, and made a connection. "Did she eat anything with nuts? Walnuts, specifically?" "The Petit Four have walnut cream," a servant offered nervously. Clara had seen this before. Her father's steward had suffered from similar attacks when exposed to shellfish. "She's having a reaction. We need to get the swelling down or she'll suffocate." "How?" Adrian demanded. "Ice, as much as you can get, and someone needs to check if she has medicine." Clara was already searching the woman's reticule, her hands steady despite her racing heart. She found a small vial tucked in a side pocket, pulled it out, and read the label. "Tincture of ephedra, for respiratory distress." Without hesitation, Clara uncorked the vial and carefully administered several drops under the woman's tongue. The crowd watched in horrified fascination as Clara worked with calm efficiency, directing servants to bring ice, elevating the woman's head, loosening her corset to help her breathe. Adrian knelt beside her, following her instructions without question, his presence solid and supporting. Gradually, terrifyingly slowly, the woman's breathing eased. The swelling began to recede. Color returned to her face. By the time the doctor arrived 15 minutes later, the crisis had passed. "You saved her life," the doctor said after examining the patient. "Another few minutes and the airway would have closed completely." "How did you know what to do?" "My father's steward suffered similar attacks," Clara said, suddenly aware that every eye in the garden was fixed on her. "I watched his wife treat them. I just remembered." The woman, Lady Hartwell, Clara learned, grasped her hand with surprising strength. "Thank you. I thought I was going to die." "You're welcome. Just avoid walnuts in the future." As Lady Hartwell was helped to a carriage to go home and rest, Clara became aware of the whispers around her, but they were different now, not scandalized or speculative, but impressed. "Did you see how calm she was?" "Didn't hesitate for a moment." "The Duke's future wife just saved Lady Hartwell's life." "Perhaps she's exactly what Thornfield needs. Someone practical, not just decorative." Clara found herself surrounded by society matrons offering congratulations, asking questions about her father's estate, treating her with a new kind of respect that had nothing to do with her engagement and everything to do with who she was as a person. And standing at the edge of the crowd, watching with an unreadable expression, was the Dowager Duchess. Their eyes met across the garden, and Clara saw something shift in the older woman's face. Pride, perhaps, or recognition, or something more complicated than either. The Duchess made her way through the crowd with deliberate purpose, her cane tapping against the garden path. When she reached Clara, she stopped and studied her for a long moment while the crowd fell silent. "That was well done," the Duchess said finally. "Quick thinking under pressure, admirable." "Thank you, Your Grace." "You didn't panic. You didn't defer to the men present. You simply saw what needed doing and did it." The Duchess's voice carried across the garden, ensuring everyone heard. "That's the mark of a true Duchess. Someone who acts with courage and competence when crisis strikes." Clara felt tears prickling at her eyes. "Your Grace." "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. Clara followed the Duchess to a quiet corner of the garden, away from listening ears. For a long moment they stood in silence, watching the party resume its normal rhythm. "I was wrong," the Duchess said finally. "About many things, but primarily about you." "You weren't wrong. Please don't interrupt. This is difficult enough." The Duchess's voice was sharp, but her eyes were soft. I hired you to save my son. That part I don't regret. But I made the mistake of thinking that once you'd served your purpose, I could shape you into the Duchess I thought Adrian needed. Someone polished and perfect and entirely under my control. She turned to face Clara directly. What I failed to understand is that Adrian doesn't need a perfect Duchess. He needs you, messy and honest and brave enough to challenge him when he's wrong. Brave enough to challenge me when I'm wrong. And I was wrong, Clara. Profoundly wrong. Clara's throat tightened. I shouldn't have been so harsh. You've done so much for me. You should have been exactly as harsh as you were. I needed to hear it. I needed to understand that you're not a project to be completed or a problem to be solved. You're a woman with her own mind and her own will, and those qualities are precisely what make you perfect for my son. The Duchess reached out and took Clara's hand, her grip surprisingly gentle. I've been so focused on saving Adrian that I forgot he doesn't need saving anymore. He needs a partner. And watching you today, seeing you take charge, make decisions, save a life without hesitating or asking permission, I realized something. What? You're already the Duchess he needs. You always were. I was just too controlling to see it. The Duchess smiled, and it was genuine and warm and the first real smile Clara had seen from her in weeks. So plan your simple wedding. Wear your mother's pearls. Choose wilted daisies if that's what makes you happy. I'll support whatever you decide because I trust your judgment. Clara felt tears spilling over. I don't want wilted daisies. I just wanted to choose. Then choose. And know that whatever you choose, you have my blessing and my support. No more manipulation, no more control. The Duchess squeezed her hand. Just a mother who loves her son and is learning to love the remarkable woman he's chosen to spend his life with. I love him too, Clara whispered. So much it terrifies me. Good. Love should terrify you a little. It means you understand what you're risking. The Duchess pulled her into an embrace that was stiff and awkward and absolutely perfect. Welcome to the family, Clara. Truly this time. The wedding took place on a crisp October afternoon in the chapel at Thornfield House, surrounded by late-blooming roses and Clara's chosen seasonal flowers, chrysanthemums and asters in shades of gold and purple. Clara wore her mother's pearls with a dress she'd helped design, simple and elegant and entirely her own choice. The guest list was smaller than originally planned, limited to people both Clara and Adrian actually cared about, rather than society obligations. The Duchess sat in the front row and cried openly, something no one had seen her do in years. Adrian stood at the altar, watching Clara walk toward him, and the look on his face was worth every struggle, every doubt, every moment of fear. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for 3 years. When they exchanged vows, his hands were steady and his voice was strong, but his eyes shone with tears. I, Adrian Blackthorne, take you, Clara Whitmore, to be my wife, my partner, my courage when I falter and my strength when I weaken. I promise to see you always, to never let you become invisible, and to love you with everything I have for as long as I live. Clara's own vows were equally simple and utterly honest. I, Clara Whitmore, take you, Adrian Blackthorne, to be my husband, my challenger when I settle for less than I deserve, and my support when I need it most. I promise to be honest with you always, to push you to be better while loving you exactly as you are, and to choose you every day for the rest of my life. When the priest pronounced them married and Adrian kissed her, the chapel erupted in applause and cheers. The wedding breakfast was everything Clara had hoped, warm and genuine and filled with laughter instead of stiff formality. The Duchess gave a toast that managed to be both touching and slightly manipulative, admitting her orchestration while claiming total innocence. I simply provided opportunity, she said with a smile. These two stubborn, wounded people did the rest themselves. Adrian's toast to his bride was shorter but more powerful. Clara came into my life when I was frozen solid, convinced I'd never feel anything again. She didn't rescue me. She challenged me. She pushed me. She refused to let me hide. And in the process, she gave me back my life. He raised his glass. To my wife, the bravest person I know. As the celebration continued into the evening, Clara found herself standing in the library with Adrian, stealing a quiet moment away from the festivities. Happy? He asked, pulling her close. Terrified, she admitted. But yes, happy. What are you afraid of? That I'll wake up and this will have been a dream. That I'll be back in that boarding house room with nothing and no one. Clara looked up at him. That I don't deserve this. You deserve everything. Adrian cupped her face in his hands. And this isn't a dream. This is real. We're real. And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that. Even when I'm difficult and stubborn and refuse to agree with you? Especially then. Those are my favorite parts. Clara laughed and kissed him and felt the last of her fear dissolve. This was real. She was seen, loved, chosen, not despite who she was, but because of it. 2 years later, Clara stood in the same ballroom where she'd once hidden in the shadows, invisible and insignificant. But now she stood at the center of the room, confident and impossible to ignore, wearing the Thornfield diamonds she'd finally agreed to accept, and a smile that came from deep, genuine happiness. The annual Thornfield Ball had been Adrian's idea, a way to open their home and their lives to society, to prove that the Marble Duke had truly thawed. Clara had agreed on the condition that they invite everyone, not just the elite, but people who'd helped them along the way. Servants who'd shown kindness, shopkeepers who'd extended credit when Clara had nothing, even Mr. Pembroke, the solicitor who'd defended her reputation. The ballroom blazed with light and music and life, so different from the hollow emptiness that had characterized Thornfield House during Adrian's frozen years. Clara moved through the crowd, speaking with guests, laughing at jokes, completely at ease in a world that had once terrified her. She caught Adrian's eye across the room and saw him smile, a real smile, warm and full of love. The Dowager Duchess appeared at Clara's elbow, resplendent in dark purple instead of her perpetual black. "You've transformed this house," she said quietly. "Not just physically, though the renovations are lovely, but the feel of it, the life in it." "We transformed it together," Clara corrected. "All three of us." "Perhaps, but you were the catalyst." The Duchess paused. "I never properly thanked you for giving me back my son." "You hired me to do exactly that." "I hired you to crack his ice. You gave him back his heart." The Duchess squeezed her arm gently. "Thank you, Clara, for being brave enough to challenge us both." As the Duchess moved away, Clara felt a small hand tug at her skirt. She looked down to find a young girl, daughter of one of the tenant farmers, staring up at her with wide eyes. "Are you really the Duchess?" the child asked. "I am. My mama says you used to be poor like us. Is that true?" Clara knelt down to the child's level, heedless of her expensive gown. "Yes, it's true. But now you're rich and important. Now I'm loved and happy. The rest is just circumstances." The child considered this seriously. "Mama says you didn't let being poor stop you from being brave. Your mama is very wise. Being poor doesn't mean you can't be brave, or strong, or worthy of respect. Remember that." The child nodded solemnly and ran off to find her mother, and Clara stood up to find Adrian watching her with that look he got sometimes, like she was the most precious thing in his world. "What?" she asked as he approached. "Nothing. Just admiring my wife." He offered his hand. "Dance with me?" "We're hosting. We should circulate. Dance with me anyway." Clara took his hand and let him lead her onto the floor, and they swept into a waltz while the crowd watched and whispered, but this time the whispers were kind. Look at them, still utterly besotted. "The Duchess is with child, you know. The announcement will be made next month. Thornfield looks 20 years younger since he married her. She's changed everything. Changed him, changed this house, changed society's entire view of what a duchess should be." Clara rested her head on Adrian's shoulder and smiled, remembering the girl she'd been 2 years ago, invisible, desperate, surviving on the edges of a world that didn't want her. That girl would never have believed she'd end up here, dancing in the center of the ballroom in her husband's arms, carrying his child, loved and respected and utterly, completely seen. "What are you thinking?" Adrian murmured. "That I challenged a duke on a dance floor and changed my entire life." "You challenged a duke on a dance floor and changed his entire life, too." Adrian pulled back to look at her. Best decision I ever made, freezing to death until you came along to thaw me. Best decision I ever made, refusing to stay invisible. They danced until the music ended and the applause began, and then they danced again because they could, because they wanted to, because they'd fought too hard for this happiness to take a single moment of it for granted. And in the shadows near the east wall, the place where Clara had once stood trying desperately to disappear, a young woman in a worn dress watched the Duchess dance and thought perhaps, just perhaps, being seen might be worth the risk. Clara caught her eye and smiled, a smile that said, "I see you, you matter. Be brave." The young woman smiled back and took a step forward into the light, because that was what Clara had learned, what she'd fought for, what she'd proven to a world that had tried to make her invisible. Everyone deserved to be seen. Everyone had the right to take up space, to speak their truth, to challenge the powerful, and demand to be treated with dignity. She'd started as nothing, a poor girl with no prospects, surviving on the edges of a ruthless world. She'd ended as everything, a duchess, yes, but more importantly, a woman who'd refused to disappear, who'd chosen courage over comfort, who'd challenged a frozen duke and melted his heart in the process. The Invisible Duchess, they'd started calling her in the early days, mocking her humble origins. But Clara Whitmore Blackthorne was anything but invisible now. She was impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss, and utterly, completely herself. And that, she'd learned, was the most powerful thing of all. The music swelled, the dancers spun, and Clara stood at the center of it all with her hand in Adrian's, her future stretching bright and endless before her. She'd survived, she'd fought, she'd won. Not because she'd become someone else, but because she'd had the courage to remain exactly who she was. And in the end, that made all the difference.